The wind was different that day. Not sharp, not cold, just different. Like it knew something the rest of us didn't. Caroline Blake stood at the edge of her backyard garden party, a trowel still in one gloved hand, half buried in the dirt, where she'd meant to plant a line of lavender. But the laughter from the patio stole her focus. It wasn't warm laughter. It was jagged. Too loud. The kind of laughter that leaves a bruise. Her grandson, Nathan, stood at the center of it. 19, lanky, handsome, in that careless way young men often are. He was flipping a football between his hands, while his father, Caroline's son, Jeremy, grilled steak and sipped from a craft beer. The whole family had shown up for the annual Blake Summer Gathering white chairs, paper lanterns, red plastic cups dotting the grass. But Caroline, as usual, felt like a guest in her own home. She dusted her gloves off, set the trowel on the stone ledge, and made her way toward the patio with a basket of garden tomatoes. Look who finally emerged from the soil, called her daughter-in-law Vicky, flipping her bleached blonde hair over one shoulder as if swatting away a fly. "Mom, you've got dirt on your cheek." Again. Caroline smiled politely, wiping her cheek with the back of her wrist. "I was planting the new batch you asked for." "Oh, right," Vicky said with a shrug, already turning back to her phone. She set the tomato basket down on the outdoor table beside a sweating pitcher of lemonade no one had touched. Nathan glanced at it, then away. His friends laughed at something he'd said, something Caroline had missed but felt. "Hey, Grandma," Nathan said suddenly, his voice a little too loud. "You ever use that old canoe anymore?" Caroline blinked, caught off guard. "No, not since before my shoulder surgery. Doctor says I shouldn't row anymore." Nathan's grin widened. "Bet you still float, though." There was a pause. A hush that wasn't quite silence, just long enough to make her heartbeat audible in her ears. "I beg your," she began. Then it happened. Nathan moved quickly, not like a joke, not with hesitation or playful wrestling. His hands, cold and deliberate, pressed against her shoulders and gave one hard push. She stumbled backward before she could process what was happening. The patio dropped 2 steps into the yard. Her feet tangled on the edge, then gravity took her. She fell into the koi pond. It wasn't deep, 3 feet at most, but the shock of cold water, the slick, algae-covered stones, and the rush of panic made it feel like an ocean. Her back hit the water with a slap her head, submerging briefly. She came up, sputtering eyes, burning hands, flailing in the fish-clouded water. Laughter. Laughter that split her open. She heard it through the water, dripping down her ears, heard it through the thud of her own heartbeat. Nathan was laughing. His friends, too. And Jeremy, her own son, stood by the grill, unmoving a spatula, in hand-mouth slightly ajar. Not laughing, but not running to help either. "Jesus, Nathan," someone muttered. "She's fine," Vicky's voice cut through. "It's not even 2 feet deep." Caroline scrambled to the edge, slipping once, then twice, before managing to grab hold of a stone and pull herself up. Her cardigan clung to her arms like seaweed. Her knees scraped raw against the gravel. She was 68 years old. Her joints screamed in protest, but her heart was louder than all of it. When she finally stood upright, dripping, covered in pond muck and shame, Nathan smirked and tossed her a pool towel like a bone to a stray dog. "Guess you still got it," he said. She said nothing. She didn't cry, she didn't yell, she didn't even blink. She turned and walked slowly, deliberately back into the house. The bathroom mirror was fogged from the heat of the shower, but she didn't bother wiping it clear. She undressed silently, folding her clothes with the same care she had when Jeremy was a child and every sock had a partner, every toy a shelf. The bruises would come up later. She could already feel the ache forming behind her ribs. She didn't wash her hair, just her hands, just enough to scrub away the algae, not the memory. Outside, she heard the music shift, Vicky's Bluetooth speaker playing some upbeat summer anthem Caroline couldn't name. She wrapped herself in the towel and stared out the small window above the sink. The garden she had built with her late husband still stood proud in wild morning glories, clinging to the old trellis. The pond where she had nearly broken her hip shimmered in the sun like it hadn't swallowed her just an hour ago. She whispered, "This house doesn't know me anymore." And she was right. That evening, after the guests left and the house fell into its usual rhythm of dishes clinking and TVs murmuring behind doors, Caroline sat at the end of the kitchen table alone. She sipped lukewarm tea. No one had asked if she was okay. No one had even knocked on the bathroom door. Jeremy walked in at one point and muttered, Nathan was just messing around, right? He didn't mean anything. Caroline looked up at her son, her only son, and said calmly, he knew exactly what he was doing. Jeremy didn't reply. He scratched his neck, mumbled something about kids these days, and left. Caroline closed her eyes and saw the pond again. The cold, the laughter, the look in Nathan's eyes, not guilt, not concern, just amusement, as if she'd been part of some harmless prank. She thought of all the Sundays she'd spent baking for him, the birthdays she helped pay for, the asthma attacks she soothed when Vicky was too busy scrolling Instagram, the nights she stayed up folding laundry because Vicky forgot. She thought of the time Nathan made her a card in kindergarten that said, "You're the hero of our house." She opened the kitchen drawer and pulled out her old worn leather-bound journal. It smelled like cedar and ink. She hadn't written in it in months. She turned to a blank page and wrote, "Today they laughed while I drowned." Then below it, "Tomorrow I begin listening to what they don't say out loud." She clicked the pen shut, stood, and looked around the room. The table, the cabinets, the walls that had once heard lullabies and piano music, now just hollow echoes and false warmth. She didn't feel broken, she felt unfinished. The koi pond still shimmered outside the kitchen window, but Caroline avoided looking at it now. It had become a symbol and not a pretty one. It was no longer a peaceful centerpiece, it was where something inside her had cracked. By morning, the bruise on her hip had bloomed a sickly violet. She pressed her fingers gently against it and winced, a reminder, not just of the fall, but of what it meant. No one had asked about it. She shuffled down the hallway in her slippers, listening to the muffled buzz of Nathan's video game bleeding through his bedroom door. Jeremy and Vicky were already up, voices low, TV humming. Caroline paused at the kitchen entrance. There was a time this space felt like hers. When every drawer held something she had picked out, every plant by the windowsill was one she had chosen. But now it was filled with gadgets she never used, snacks she didn't buy, and conversations that didn't include her. "Morning," she said quietly, stepping inside. Jeremy glanced up from his phone. "Hey, Ma." Vicky didn't look up at all. She was peeling an avocado with the precision of someone cutting a diamond. "Sleep okay?" Jeremy asked absently. She nodded. "Fine." Lie. Her bones had ached. Her shoulder throbbed. But mostly it was the silence that hurt. Not the physical kind, but the emotional vacuum, the kind where you're invisible, even in the room you paid for. Vicky finally glanced at her. "Nathan said you were pretty shaken yesterday." Caroline blinked. "He pushed me." Vicky raised an eyebrow. "You sure he said you tripped? You've been a little unsteady lately." There it was. That pivot. That soft rewriting of truth. Caroline looked at her daughter-in-law, perfectly pressed blouse, manicured fingers, that smile that never touched her eyes, and realized something quietly devastating. She wasn't being gaslit. She was being phased out. "Maybe you need to be more careful," Vicky added, voice honeyed with false concern. "You're not exactly in your 40s anymore." Caroline opened her mouth, then closed it. She wanted to scream to remind them she was the one who co-signed their mortgage when Jeremy's credit score couldn't buy a toaster, that she babysat Nathan every day after preschool so they could go to wine tastings and Pilates, that she had cashed out part of her retirement to help Jeremy through his second layoff. But she didn't scream. She just nodded. Of course. And in that moment, something shifted, something small, subtle, but irreversible. Later that day, she stood in the hallway watching Nathan pass by without acknowledging her, not even a glance. He used to tug on her hand and beg her to play tag in the garden, used to crawl into her lap with scraped knees and whisper, "Don't tell Mom, but I think you're nicer than she is." Now she was wallpaper, an old photograph you walk past without seeing. That night, in the quiet of her room, she made a list in her journal titled, "Proof I No Longer Exist." 1. Jeremy hasn't hugged me in 2 years. 2. Vicky asked the neighbor to host Thanksgiving. 3. Nathan calls me her when he thinks I'm not listening. 4. My birthday passed without a card. 5. They redecorated the living room without asking. 6. They moved my rocking chair to the garage. She paused, then added, 7. They laughed when I fell. She closed the book and stared at the ceiling. A single moth fluttered near the light, bumping into it again and again. Caroline felt the same, drawn to something that no longer welcomed her. 2 days passed, then 3. No one mentioned the pond incident again, not even in jest. It had been absorbed into the great forgetting, a convenience. Caroline, however, remembered everything. She watched how they whispered when she entered a room, how they exaggerated their concern when others were around. "Mom's been slipping lately," Vicky murmured once during a phone call to her sister. "I think we need to start considering options." Options, like she was a cabinet they were tired of. That afternoon, she opened the kitchen drawer with the ledgers, the same drawer she'd kept since her husband Richard passed 7 years ago. Neatly labeled folders, Home Deed Roth IRA University Fund, Nathan. She thumbed through the fund. $60,000. Untouched. She'd started it the year Nathan was born, skipping vacations, baking and selling pies during the holiday season, pinching pennies when she could have bought new shoes, because she believed in his future. She didn't cry. She closed the folder, locked it in the fireproof box, and made another note in her journal. A mother builds, a grandmother sacrifices, a family forgets. The next morning, Dolores arrived. Dolores, her childhood best friend, the kind of woman who wore leopard print cardigans and combat boots like they were meant to be paired. She walked straight into the kitchen, uninvited as usual, holding a paper bag and her signature iced coffee in a reusable tumbler with a cracked flamingo sticker on it. "Caroline Ann Blake," she said without greeting. "You look like warmed over regret. Sit." Caroline smiled. "That's new." Dolores set the bag down and began unpacking muffins. "I heard what happened at the barbecue." "Of course you did." Angela from the book club saw the whole thing. She said it looked like a frat boy initiation. "Only you didn't sign up." Caroline sighed. "They said I tripped." Dolores stopped moving. "Do you believe that?" "No." "Then why do you let them say it?" Caroline didn't answer. Dolores pulled up a chair. "Because they taught you that peace is worth your silence, that love is measured in tolerance." She pulled a folded envelope from her purse and slid it across the table. "My lawyer, just in case." Caroline stared at it. "I'm not ready," she said. Dolores tilted her head. "You were ready the second you wrote that journal entry." Caroline blinked. "You read my journal." "No, but I know you, and women like us. We don't survive this long without knowing when something dies, even if it's not buried yet." That night, Caroline sat in the guest room, her sanctuary now, the one space untouched by Vicky's interior design experiments. She looked at the small bookshelf, the faded photo of her and Richard on the mantel, and the old tea set he bought her on their 25th anniversary. She whispered, "I miss you." Not just Richard. She missed herself. The version of her who had opinions, who danced barefoot in the garden, who laughed so hard she spilled wine on the carpet and didn't care. Now she asked permission to use her own oven. Now she waited for the house to empty before she dared to hum. She opened her journal and wrote, "I am a ghost in a house full of people who forgot I was ever flesh." And then, "Tomorrow I will stop asking for space. I will start reclaiming it." She closed the book, stood, and walked to the kitchen. Everyone was asleep. She made herself a cup of tea, real tea, loose leaf, jasmine. She stood at the sink, sipping it slowly, staring out at the pond. The water still. Moonlight catching on its surface like silver regret. And as the steam curled around her face, Caroline smiled, not because she forgave, but because she was remembering. The morning sun filtered through gauzy curtains, warming the edge of Caroline's bed like a gentle hand. It was the kind of light that once made her feel grateful to be alive. Now it just reminded her she hadn't slept. She had spent the night staring at the ceiling journal open, but untouched pen resting beside it like a question she hadn't answered yet. What do you do when you realize your love has become someone else's leverage? You start checking the ledgers. And Caroline had plenty. She brought the fireproof lockbox to the kitchen table early before anyone else was awake. The house was quiet, still. She liked it best this way, when no one else was around to look through her. Inside the box were the things that used to matter, a life cataloged in neat folders and labeled tabs. She began flipping through them one by one. Property title. Blake residence still in her name. Jeremy had tried twice to get her to sign over partial ownership for tax purposes, he claimed. She refused both times. Quietly, politely. She said she'd think about it. She never did. Nathan's university fund, she traced the printed numbers with the tip of her finger. $61,730.42. She hadn't touched it, not even during COVID, not even when Jeremy and Vicky were out of work and couldn't help pay for Nathan's tuition. She had paid it all. Kindergarten to high school, the private tutor when he struggled with writing, the new laptop when his crashed mysteriously mid-semester. Every gift, every emergency, every lie dressed up as a crisis. She stared at the fund balance and felt numb. She opened her journal and began listing truths. Nathan's braces, $7,200. Jeremy's mortgage bailout, $22,000. Vicky's emergency dental surgery, $4,300. The summer house repairs, $15,600. Nathan's tuition to date, $18,000. Groceries, utilities, and uncounted little things too many to list. Underneath it all, she wrote, "This is not a record of generosity. It's a record of how I disappeared." Around 8 a.m., Vicky entered the kitchen wearing a robe and holding her phone like a trophy. "Oh, good, you're up," she said. "We're having a little dinner Friday, just a few of Daniel's friends from work and my yoga group. Can you make your lemon chicken? You know, the one everyone loves." Caroline looked up slowly. Do they love it, or do they just love not making it themselves? Vicky blinked. "Excuse me." Caroline smiled softly. "Of course, I'll make it." She didn't argue, not yet. She wasn't ready to give them the storm. She was still drawing the map. Later that day, she returned the documents to the lockbox and placed it under her bed. Then she sat by the phone. Not the house landline, the one in her own room, the one no one used anymore unless they wanted her to take a message. She dialed a number she hadn't in 3 years. Peter Holloway, her lawyer. He answered on the second ring, voice steady as always. "Caroline Blake," he said, "I thought you'd retired from worrying." "I did," she replied, "but now I'm worrying backwards." He chuckled gently. "How can I help? I want to talk about a living trust." There was a pause. "Still in good health, I assume." "I'm fine," she said. "But the people around me are acting like I'm not, and I want to be ready." Peter cleared his throat. "Understood. Want to come in this week?" "I'm not ready to sign anything," she said. "I just want to know, what are my options?" "You have all the power, Caroline," he said simply, "unless you give it away." That night, she didn't write in her journal. Instead, she pulled out a stack of old photo albums, the thick kind bound in leather with plastic sleeves and faded notes scribbled in pen. She stopped at a photo from Nathan's 3rd birthday. He was grinning chocolate frosting on his cheeks, arms wrapped tightly around her neck. She traced his outline with her thumb. "I remember you," she whispered. "I just don't know where you went." She placed the photo back and pulled out a new folder. To do. Review the trust documents. List every account with joint access. Remove her name from the house group chat, the one she hadn't spoken in for 3 weeks. Refill the bird feeders. Finish the lemon cake. Ask Dolores about that retirement community she once mentioned. The last one wasn't underlined. Not yet, but it would be. By Thursday, the house felt colder. Not physically, it was July and the air was thick with heat, but emotionally. Nathan barely spoke to her. Jeremy was distracted. And Vicky kept smiling. That rehearsed, frozen smile. Caroline knew what it meant. They were planning something. That night, as she was wiping down the counters, she overheard them whispering in the next room. "She's not as sharp as she used to be," Vicky said. Jeremy replied, "I know, but we can't just push her out." "She's not going to live forever," Vicky snapped. "And it's our house someday." Caroline stood frozen. Our house, someday. That word echoed through her like a cannon shot. She left the sponge in the sink, walked back to her room, and sat on the edge of the bed. Her knees ached. Her heart ached more. She opened her journal and wrote in large, deliberate letters. "They are no longer whispering because they fear I'll hear. They're whispering because they think I'm already gone." The next morning, Caroline went out to the garden early. The lavender had bloomed despite the heat, its color brilliant against the dull green. She knelt down gloveless, letting the soil sink beneath her nails. She whispered aloud, "They think the silence means surrender." Then she smiled, because it didn't. It meant strategy. The house was too quiet for 9 a.m. Caroline sat on the sun porch, a faded quilt over her lap, sipping tea from a cracked mug that still had her late husband Richard's initials on the bottom. The same initials she used to trace with her thumb during arguments, holidays, hospital visits, every time she needed to remind herself of the life they had built. The silence wasn't peaceful today. It was performative. She could hear them, Jeremy, Vicky, and Nathan tiptoeing around her now. Like the floor creaked differently under her grief. Like if they stepped too hard, the truth would come spilling out of the walls. Caroline wasn't fooled. Not by the extra smiles. Not by Vicky asking if she wanted a pillow for her back. Not by Nathan offering to carry the groceries when he hadn't looked her in the eye since the pond. Their kindness was not kindness. It was containment. She returned to her journal and flipped back to older pages. It had become her evidence, one that no one could erase, one that held the memory of who she had been before they began sanding her down. She stopped on a page titled, simply, "The Year I Disappeared." Underneath were entries like, March 12th, Nathan told me my stories are boring. First time. June 2nd, Vicky repainted the kitchen. Didn't ask. September 19th, they replaced the family photo. I wasn't in it. November 5th, Jeremy asked if I wanted to move into one of those places as a joke. She stared at the ink, some smudged from earlier tears. She wasn't just invisible. She was in transition from person to burden. And somewhere in that shift, her silence had made room for something else. Resentment, yes, but also resolve. Later that day, Caroline called Dolores. Not for muffins, not for opinions, but for history. "Do you remember the old shoebox?" she asked when Dolores picked up. Dolores didn't miss a beat. "The one you kept under the piano bench." "Yes, still got it. You want me to bring it over?" Caroline hesitated. "No. Just tell me, did I ever take anything out of it?" "Nope. Just kept stuffing things in, letters, receipts, awards, your whole damn life in ink and tape." Caroline laughed softly. "You always make it sound bigger than it was." "That's because it was. I've never known anyone who saved more people quietly than you." That evening, she ventured into the attic. The air was hot, thick with insulation and forgotten holidays. Boxes were stacked in familiar disarray. She knew what each one held without even looking. Box 1, Nathan, age, 0 to 5. Inside were drawing stick figures with huge eyes, finger-painted suns, a crude heart with grama in shaky red crayon. She pulled out a page with a drawing of her and Nathan holding hands beside a big yellow house. "I miss you," she whispered, not knowing if she meant the boy or the moment. Box 2. Richard's things. The scent of him was still faint motor oil, cinnamon, gum aftershave. His old flannel shirts folded next to a watch that didn't tick anymore. She pressed one to her face, breathing in the memory. He would have seen this coming. He always had a radar for people who smiled too hard while holding a knife behind their back. Box 3, legal and letters. There it was, the folder labeled Estate, 2018 revision, the one Richard had her update after his diagnosis. She opened it, rereading her own signature. Back then it had felt unnecessary, overly cautious. Now it felt like armor she didn't know she'd need. She added a new page to the folder. The first draft of her new will. Blank so far, but ready. Back downstairs, she found Nathan alone in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone. He didn't acknowledge her presence until she opened the cabinet. "Hey," he said flatly, "do we have oat milk?" Caroline paused. "There's whole milk in the fridge." He didn't respond, just made a sound like she'd offered him poison and went back to tapping on the screen. She watched him, not with anger, with curiosity. Who was this boy? Where had he learned to speak to her like she was a vending machine? She remembered the boy who cried when his pet fish died. The boy who used to whisper, "Don't die, Grandma," when she tucked him in. Now he couldn't even say thank you for breakfast. He looked up suddenly, maybe feeling her stare. What he said, defensive? She just smiled. "You remind me of someone I used to know." In the quiet of her room, Caroline opened her journal again and titled a new page, Things They'll Never Remember. How I hid Jeremy's overdue bills so Vicky wouldn't find out. The night I stayed up with Nathan when he had nightmares and his parents went to a gala. The time I canceled my anniversary trip to take care of Vicky's mom. That I kept every photo, even the blurry ones. That the piano they sold on Craigslist was the one Nathan first learned, Twinkle Twinkle on. That I still know every birthday, even theirs. She stopped, then added one last line. They will forget me, but I will remember who I was before I gave it all away. That weekend, Dolores picked her up for brunch. It was a small diner just outside town. Vinyl booths, waitresses who called you hon, the kind of place that served familiarity with every refill of coffee. Caroline sipped her tea, hands wrapped tightly around the mug. They think I'm winding down, she said. Dolores raised an eyebrow, and I'm just beginning. There's a particular sound a woman makes when she's had enough of waiting. It's not a scream, not a cry. It's the firm knock on a kitchen door before 7 a.m. on a Sunday. Knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp raps, urgent, unrelenting, just like the woman standing on the porch. Dolores Hartley, cardigan thrown over pajamas, her signature turquoise windbreaker, unzipped and flapping in the morning wind like a flag. Caroline opened the door still in her robe, eyes puffy from another restless night. Dolores didn't wait for an invitation. She swept in with a paper bag, a folder, and an expression that said someone was about to get saved whether they wanted it or not. Coffee. Now she barked. And none of that weak peppermint stuff you've been sipping like a nun on probation. Real coffee. Jet fuel. Caroline blinked. Good morning to you two. Dolores dropped her bag on the table and held up a finger. Do not test me, Caroline Ann Blake. I've been up since 5 and my grandnephew tried to teach me what a meme is. I am not okay. Caroline smiled a real one. Dolores always did have impeccable timing. They sat at the small breakfast table, the one tucked in the corner where the sun hit just right. Dolores stirred sugar into her mug like she was making a potion. Then without preamble, she slid the folder across the table. Peter said you called. Caroline froze. I didn't. Dolores raised a hand. You didn't have to say anything. I know the signs. The journal is back on the nightstand. You've started locking the bathroom door again. And you're folding your tea towels like they're about to be audited by the IRS. Caroline opened the folder. It held copies of estate documents, trust outlines, power of attorney templates. Everything in order. Everything quietly powerful. I don't want to rush into anything, Caroline said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. Dolores sipped her coffee. You're not rushing. You're catching up to your own truth. The front door creaked open upstairs. Jeremy's voice floated down the staircase, followed by Vicky's half-muttered complaints about laundry. Dolores leaned in. Do they know you're thinking about leaving? No. Do you want them to? Caroline paused, then shook her head. Dolores nodded. Good. Sometimes silence isn't submission. It's strategy. They spent the morning going over paperwork. Dolores had already compiled a list of Caroline's accounts, ones she remembered from years of tax prep they'd done together. There's a retirement village in Silver Pines, she said casually, as if suggesting lunch. Small town. Quiet, birdsong, and old men who still open doors. Caroline laughed. That sounds both charming and slightly terrifying. Dolores winked. Perfect then. By noon, the house was buzzing. Nathan had friends over. Vicky was on speakerphone with someone about countertops. Jeremy was watching golf with the volume too loud. No one noticed Caroline slip into the backyard with her gardening gloves. She knelt beside the roses and began pruning in silence. Not to tend, but to think. Each clip of the shears felt like punctuation. Clip, you gave too much. Clip, they stopped seeing you. Clip, it's not too late. She gathered the trimmings into a basket. As she stood, she noticed Nathan by the patio laughing. He didn't glance her way. Not once. She returned to her room, took out her journal, and wrote, They don't see what I carry. They only see what they expect to inherit. That evening, Dolores called again. I talked to Peter. He can take you on Thursday. Quiet meeting, no pressure. Caroline hesitated. What do I say? Whatever you need to say, Dolores replied. And if your voice shakes, that just means it matters. Thursday came faster than expected. Caroline dressed carefully, navy cardigan gray slacks a brooch she hadn't worn since Richard's funeral. Something about putting on that brooch made her spine feel straighter. Dolores arrived precisely on time, keys jangling, humming an off-key version of I Will Survive. "Ready?" she asked. Caroline exhaled. Almost. Dolores touched her arm. "You don't have to burn the house down, honey. Just stop rebuilding it for people who never learned to appreciate the warmth." At the law office, Peter greeted her with a warm handshake and a stack of crisp documents. They talked softly, professionally, like two people arranging the weather. "What would you like to do first?" he asked gently. Caroline looked down at the paper in front of her. It was blank at the bottom, waiting for her to decide. "I want to watch first," she said. Peter raised an eyebrow. "I want to see how they treat me when they think I'm still fragile, when they assume they'll be taken care of. I want to observe, and then I'll decide." Peter nodded slowly. "You've still got control," he said. Caroline smiled. "I'm just starting to use it." On the drive home, Dolores didn't say much, just kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting gently on Caroline's knee. "I'm proud of you," she said finally. Caroline didn't reply. She looked out the window as the trees blurred past, thinking about roots, how some spread wide, others dig deep, and how sometimes you have to replant yourself to survive. She turned back to Dolores and said, "Next week, will you take me to Silver Pines?" Dolores's eyes didn't leave the road, but her smile said everything. It arrived in the mail 3 days later. No dramatic ceremony, no thick manila envelope marked urgent. Just a simple white folder on the kitchen table with Caroline's name written in Peter Holloway's elegant, lawyerly hand. Jeremy must have brought it in from the mailbox. He didn't even mention it. She found it while clearing away cereal bowls no one had offered to put in the dishwasher. The folder sat on the edge of the table, untouched, unnoticed. But to Caroline, it glowed like a flare in the night. Inside were options, not answers, not revenge, just power finally returned to the hands it belonged in. She carried it to her bedroom and closed the door. It was heavier than it looked, or maybe that was just the weight of what it represented. She sat on the bed, opened the folder, and began reading. Peter had been thorough. A draft revision of her living trust removing Jeremy and Vicky as primary successors. An option to redirect Nathan's education fund to a scholarship foundation, one that supported first-generation college students pursuing social work. A plan for donating the house after her passing to a community women's shelter. The Blake Legacy Program, he had titled it without her permission. It made her laugh. And finally, a short handwritten note from Peter. "Take your time. You're not just signing documents, you're reclaiming authorship." Caroline closed the folder and stared out the window. The koi pond shimmered in the sunlight. Nathan had tossed a slice of bread into it earlier. The fish were darting through the water, now hungry, confused, chasing crumbs. She whispered, "I am not your crumbs." At dinner that night, the silence returned. Not tension, indifference. Jeremy talked about some client who didn't understand boundaries. Vicky scrolled on her phone, nodding absent-mindedly. Nathan ate with headphones and watching a video of someone playing a prank on an elderly woman. Caroline stared at him. He laughed at the video, not even looking up. She watched the edges of his mouth twist, that smugness, that comfort, with cruelty. She imagined standing up and slapping the phone out of his hand. Instead, she stood slowly and excused herself. No one noticed. She returned to her room and opened the drawer where she kept her journals. She pulled out a fresh one, a deep green leather-bound notebook, a gift from Dolores years ago, unused. On the first page, she wrote, "The final ledger. Today I held the folder, the one that says, I decide what happens next. Not them, not age, not obligation dressed as affection, me." Then underneath it, she wrote the question that had been circling her thoughts like a hawk. What do they become when the inheritance disappears? The next morning, she left the folder in plain view on the kitchen table again, this time deliberately while she made pancakes. Jeremy walked in and paused when he saw it. "What's this?" "Legal stuff," Caroline said, simply flipping a pancake. He didn't ask further, but he looked at it longer than he should have, like he'd seen a shadow where there used to be light. Later that afternoon, Vicky intercepted her by the stairs. "You've been meeting with a lawyer." Her tone was sweet, too sweet. Caroline tilted her head. "Why do you ask?" Vicky smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Just wondering. In case you needed help with anything. It's easy to get overwhelmed with those things. Caroline stared at her for a long, quiet second, then said, I've been managing a household since I was 20. If I was going to get overwhelmed, it would have happened before Pinterest and yoga mats. Vicky blinked. Caroline walked past her slow and steady. That night, she dreamed of Richard. He stood at the edge of the koi pond, hands in his pockets, that crooked smile on his face. He looked just like he had at 45, sleeves rolled up, eyes soft but unflinching. You ready? He asked in the dream. Caroline looked down. She was barefoot, standing on the water's edge, the surface still and clear. I think so, she whispered. Then stopped waiting for permission. She awoke just after dawn. The house was quiet, still. She got dressed, packed her garden tools in a small cloth bag, and headed outside. The roses needed trimming again. But more than that, she needed space to breathe. Dolores pulled into the driveway 10 minutes later like she always did, like she had a radar for when Caroline needed her. Caroline didn't say anything at first, just walked to the car tools still in hand. Dolores looked at her. Well, she asked. Caroline opened the passenger door. Take me to Silver Pines. The lemon cake was still warm when Caroline placed it on the kitchen counter. She hadn't baked one in months. Not since her last birthday when no one remembered and she sliced her own piece in a quiet kitchen. But today she made it out of instinct, out of muscle memory, or maybe to test herself. Was she still the kind of woman who gave sweet things to people, who treated her like a fixture? She stepped back and looked at the cake. It looked perfect, which was exactly the problem. That evening, the house filled up faster than she expected. Vicky's voice rang from the front hallway, chirping into the phone about wine pairings. Jeremy dragged in folding chairs. Nathan emerged from his room dressed better than usual, collared shirt hair slicked back like he was about to charm someone out of something. Caroline stood in the kitchen doorway unnoticed. She heard them laugh, talk, argue about music. She heard the doorbell ring. Then she heard her name. She still hear one of Vicky's friends asked in a whisper, not quiet enough. Yeah, Vicky said with a sigh, we're working on it. Caroline returned to her room and waited for them to need something, a fork, a serving tray, a bottle opener. Waited for someone to remember that she had made the lemon cake her signature. No one came. Instead, she listened. And what she heard she would never forget. The conversation began in the kitchen. Caroline sat just down the hallway, the door cracked open. She doesn't seem all there anymore, a woman said softly. Right, Vicky responded. It's getting bad. I mean, she forgets things all the time. I saw her stir her tea with a fork last week. Nathan chimed in and everyone laughed. Jeremy added, she's just old. She doesn't want to admit she needs help. Isn't there a facility nearby? Someone asked. And then the sentence that sealed it. She's kind of a liability now. Liability. Caroline stared at the wallpaper across the room, hands trembling not from age, not from weakness, but from fury wrapped in heartbreak. She was a liability, not a mother, not a grandmother, not the woman who paid for braces and ballet, not the one who held them through the flu, the layoffs, the sleepless nights. Just a liability. She stood slowly and walked toward the kitchen. None of them noticed. She reached the counter and sliced herself a piece of cake. Still warm, still soft, still hers. She sat at the small table by the window, fork in hand, and took a bite. It tasted of lemons and memory and something else, finality. Later that night, after the guests left and the dishwasher hummed in the background, Caroline stood by the window watching the moon rise over the koi pond. Dolores called her voice low and steady. They said it, Caroline whispered. I know, Dolores replied. Angela told me she was at the party. Liability. Dolores was quiet for a long moment. Then, so, are you ready now? Caroline didn't pause. Yes. The next morning, she packed her suitcase. She didn't rush. She folded each sweater with care. She chose the scarf Richard gave her on their 25th. She tucked the green journal beside her night cream. She placed a single photo of Nathan, age 5, gap-toothed and smiling at the bottom of her bag. Not out of sentiment, out of closure. By noon, she had moved her lockbox, her documents, and her valuables into Dolores's car. No one noticed. Not Jeremy. Not Vicky. Not Nathan. They were too busy arguing over who left the oven on. Before she left, she placed one thing on the kitchen table: the lemon cake untouched. Next to it, the folder from Peter, closed, neatly labeled. On top, a yellow sticky note with 2 words in neat cursive. "Thank you." It was not gratitude. It was punctuation. As Dolores pulled away from the curb, Caroline didn't look back. She looked ahead at the winding road, the trees, the sky, at the possibility of beginning again. The alarm rang at 5:00 a.m., low and steady. No beeping. Just a soft chime from the travel clock Richard had once packed for their anniversary trip to Maine. Caroline didn't hit snooze. She swung her feet over the edge of the bed, her soles touching the cold floor. Her room was quiet, but this time it wasn't the silence of dismissal. It was the silence of someone choosing not to explain themselves anymore. She dressed in layers, her navy cardigan charcoal pants, the pearl earrings she hadn't worn since her last doctor's appointment, when she still believed in being presentable for people who no longer saw her. At exactly 5:30 a.m., she rolled her suitcase down the hallway. The wheels barely made a sound over the hardwood. The house was still. Jeremy's door cracked slightly, snoring. Vicky's voice murmured faintly in her sleep. Nathan's room had music pulsing low under the door, some late-night video still playing. He'd stayed up again, probably messaging friends or watching prank compilations, the kind that made a mockery of emotion. No one stirred as she passed them. Not a single door opened. Not one light flicked on. In the kitchen, she paused. The lemon cake was gone. A third eaten. Fork still in the sink, so they had noticed it. Just not her. She left nothing behind this time. No notes, no journals, no trail of clues. Only what she had given for decades now removed in a single morning. Dolores pulled into the driveway at 5:58 a.m. Right on time. The train station was quiet. Just 2 elderly men on a bench sipping coffee from styrofoam cups. A young mother holding a toddler asleep on her shoulder, and Caroline standing beside her single suitcase, wearing the look of someone who was no longer afraid to leave quietly. Dolores walked with her to the platform, the early sky still colored in lavender and gray. "Got your ticket?" Dolores asked, brushing something invisible from Caroline's shoulder. Caroline nodded. "One way." "Good," Dolores said. "You always were too polite about round trips." They stood in silence as the train approached. Then Caroline turned and embraced her, firm but brief, the kind of hug that didn't need tears to prove its depth. Dolores whispered, "You're not running, you're reclaiming." The train ride was uneventful, but the space. Caroline sat by the window, her suitcase tucked under the seat, her coat folded neatly on her lap. She watched the trees blur past, the towns melt into one another, the sky shift from gray to gold. She didn't cry. She didn't sigh. She simply was. And for the first time in years, that was enough. Silver Pines was quieter than she expected. The retirement community sat on the edge of a sleepy town with maple trees lining the drive and squirrels darting across walkways like tiny messengers of peace. Her room was small but sunlit, a twin bed by a wide window, a desk, a bookshelf, a closet just big enough for her carefully curated wardrobe. She unpacked slowly. One sweater, one photo, one journal, one life reassembled. On the windowsill, she placed the only photo she had brought, Nathan, age 5, holding a handmade sign that read, "I love grandma." She looked at it, then turned the frame face down. Not out of malice, out of necessity. She spent her first full day walking the grounds. There was a communal garden, someone was tending the tomatoes already. There was a library, small but full of paperbacks with dog-eared pages. And there was a bench beneath a tree with blossoms just beginning to fall. She sat there for an hour. No phone calls, no obligations. No one asking her to move over, shut up, or make something from scratch. Just breath and birdsong. That evening, Caroline wrote in her journal, "I am not gone. I am just not available. Not to those who mistook my giving for weakness. Not to those who waited for my decline like vultures watching the sky. I left on my own terms." Without slamming a door, but with every intention of never walking back through it. She closed the journal and smiled. Back in her old house, no one noticed until dinner. Jeremy knocked on her door and found the room empty. The drawers neat, the closet half full, the bed made. The lemon cake gone. Her suitcase missing. No note, no voicemail, just silence. They called her phone. It rang once, then stopped. They tried Peter. He didn't answer until the next morning. "She's not missing," he said plainly. "She's moved on." It arrived 5 days after her departure. A plain white envelope, no return address, no stamps, just their names printed on the front in Caroline's deliberate flowing script. Jeremy, Vicky, Nathan. The house was quieter than usual when it landed on the kitchen counter. No one had unpacked the dishwasher. The living room still smelled faintly of lemon cake and unease. Vicky found the envelope first. She called Jeremy in with a clipped, "You should see this." Nathan wandered in a minute later, phone in hand, half distracted. He saw the envelope and rolled his eyes. "She's probably sending us retirement photos." But Jeremy knew better. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside was a single letter handwritten in that same script. No harshness, no accusations, just clarity. "To the three of you. You may be wondering where I am. But if you truly paid attention to me these past few years, the better question would be, how long did it take you to notice I was gone? Let me put your minds at ease. I am safe. I am well. I am somewhere you are not entitled to follow." This letter is not meant to punish. It is meant to reveal. For years I gave. I gave money. I gave time. I gave love in ways you stopped seeing as gifts and started treating as expectations. I paid for school groceries, braces, house repairs, birthday parties, and silence. I gave up anniversaries, friendships, even my sense of self, so you wouldn't feel the burden of responsibility. And still you found me inconvenient, a relic, a liability. You laughed when I was in pain. You dismissed my voice, my experience, my worth, not in cruelty, but in something far colder indifference. So I did what any woman must do when her love becomes invisible. I left. The trust is gone. The house will not be passed to you. The education fund has been redirected to a scholarship foundation for students who still believe in kindness. You will receive nothing from me in death because you gave me nothing of value in life, not love, not respect, not care. And love without those things is not love. It is transaction. I am not your bank. I am not your background character. I am not your memory to distort later. I am Caroline Blake, and for the first time in decades, I belong to myself. Jeremy folded the letter in silence. Vicky stared at the table, her lips pressed into a thin line. Nathan laughed. "She's being dramatic. She'll come back." Jeremy shook his head. "No," he said, "she won't." At Silver Pines, Caroline sat beneath a tree with a book in her lap and a warm breeze running soft fingers through her silver hair. She had mailed the letter without fear, without need for confirmation. She didn't crave their replies. She didn't wait by the phone. She knew what silence meant now. It wasn't absence. It was freedom. That evening, she sat in the common room with a small group of residents. They played cards and argued over rules with the kind of gentle fire only older women knew how to wield. "You play like you're hiding something," one of them teased. Caroline smiled. "I'm just now learning how to hold cards again. Thought I'd start with these." They laughed, but she meant it. For too long, she had revealed her entire hand before anyone else had even sat at the table. Now she held things close, not secrets, just dignity. She returned to her room and opened her journal. A new entry. I wrote them the truth. Not out of anger, but out of mourning. Mourning the idea that they'd ever see me as more than what I gave. Now that idea is buried, and I walk lighter because of it. She looked out the window. The moon hung low, full, and patient. She whispered, "You saw me, didn't you?" And in the wind brushing the trees, she felt the reply. Back at the house, Jeremy sat in the living room with a glass of whiskey and a silence he couldn't drown. Vicky was upstairs on the phone with her sister ranting about legal theft. Nathan had locked himself in his room again, gaming, rage typing at someone who beat him in a match. None of them asked how Caroline was. None of them considered what she might be doing. They only asked, why would she do this to us? As if the answer hadn't been echoing for years in every ignored moment, every dismissed plea, every joke made at her expense. The hallway at Silver Pines was quiet except for the occasional hum of soft music from a neighbor's room and the distant clink of teacups in the shared lounge. Caroline walked slowly, but not because of age, because she finally had time to notice things again. The light slanting through the window, the sound of a robin's wings flitting past the screen, the feel of her own pulse steady and unhurried. Her hair, once hidden in buns or tied back for convenience, now flowed freely past her shoulders, a small act of rebellion that no one here questioned. No one here asked her what she was doing for dinner. No one here asked her to prove her usefulness. They just asked if she'd like to join them for cards, or walk the garden path, or read aloud during poetry night. It felt foreign, this soft sort of living, and then it didn't. That morning, she had woken with a different kind of peace in her chest. Not a joy, not even a relief, just balance. The scales inside her, once tipped by obligation, now sat even. She opened her journal and wrote, "I'm not gone. I am not angry. I am not waiting. I am simply no longer participating in a life where I was treated like an afterthought." She closed the journal and placed it on her nightstand beside a new book, a gift from Dolores. The inscription inside read, "To the bravest woman I know who left before she had to die to be free." Caroline visited the garden that afternoon. The tomatoes were ripening. A woman named Lucille handed her a pair of gloves. "They always grow better when you talk to them," she said. Caroline smiled. "They're lucky. I've spent years being talked over." Lucille laughed not at her, but with her. "Well then, welcome home." Back in her old house, the cracks had started to show. The fridge was emptier than usual. Jeremy hadn't remembered to pay the electricity bill, so the second floor had gone dark for a night. Vicky was fighting with the HOA about backyard furniture. Nathan had dropped out of community college without telling anyone. The folder Caroline left behind was gone now, tucked away in some drawer no one opened again. They no longer spoke of her in public, too embarrassed. But in quiet corners late at night, she lived in the silence between their questions. 1 week after the letter arrived, Jeremy called Peter Holloway. "We didn't realize she was that upset," he said. Peter's voice remained calm. "She didn't leave because she was upset. She left because she was finished." Vicky tried next. "She's not unstable, is she?" Peter replied. "She's more stable than anyone I've met this year." Then came Nathan, a text message. "Grandma?" "I didn't mean it. You know that, right? I was just joking." There was no reply. Caroline had changed her number. At Silver Pines, Caroline now spent evenings sitting on a bench overlooking the small lake behind the property. It wasn't deep, no koi, no dock, just still water and the occasional duck drifting without direction. She liked that lake. It reminded her that sometimes silence was the purest form of protection. One evening, a young volunteer named Ava sat beside her. Ava had a soft voice and eyes that blinked often as though trying to see the world slower than everyone else. "You have family?" she asked gently. Caroline thought for a moment. "I had people I raised, but I'm not sure I'd call that family anymore." Ava didn't pry. She just said, "Well, I'm glad you're here." And Caroline realized so was she. In her final journal entry for the month, Caroline wrote, "They wanted me to fade away quietly. They wanted my money, my house, my time, not my presence, but I didn't disappear. I simply relocated. I stopped auditioning for the role of someone's convenience. I rewrote the script, and at the bottom, in bold, slanted handwriting, she wasn't lost, she left." The next morning, Caroline received a letter. Not from Jeremy, not from Vicky, not from Nathan, from a student, a recipient of the scholarship. Handwritten uneven, full of earnest misspellings. "Dear Ms. Blake, I don't know who you are, but someone said you helped make this scholarship possible. I just wanted to say thank you. I never thought college was going to happen, but now I'm here, and I promise I won't waste it. I hope you're doing something that makes you happy, because you made something good happen for me. Sincerely, Maya Lopez." Caroline held the letter to her chest and cried. The kind of cry that isn't sorrow or regret, but release. She had planted something new, not in her family, but in the world, and it was already blooming. That night, she stood by the lake and watched the stars reflect off the water. She whispered, "You were right, Richard. I waited too long." But then she smiled and added, "But I left just in time."